Hi, everyone. I'm Mariangela Maguire, and this is Nothing But Now on Transformation Talk Radio. Thank you so much for joining me today. As I say in the introduction, and like to say at the beginning of this show, this hour that you might be spending with me is, I hope, in itself a mindfulness practice, a space where you can bring your attention and awareness to the present moment, where you can give yourself an opportunity to relax into the moment and allow yourself to find the places in your experience that resonate with today's topic so that you deepen your understanding of your life as you become a student of your own mind. My topics are intended, of course, to support people in their mindfulness journey, to increase mindfulness in your life, and again, mindfulness, bringing our attention and awareness to the present moment without judgment. Of course, it sounds kind of simple. I think I've always thought it sounded like a simple goal, but it can be very difficult to achieve. Its value is that the mindfulness practice can bring us greater internal peace. And being peaceful within ourselves allows us to bring more peace into the world. And in our fractured, complex world, being a source of greater peace seems to me a worthy aspiration for all of us. So here we are in the middle of February. We are in what I think is technically called an intertropical convergence zone. That's right, the doldrums. I don't know where you live, but I know where I live. What is often a very lovely time of the year for me, because I used to live in the upper Midwest and I know snow, is now snowing. Huh, great. As I said to Jacob, my producer, a few minutes ago, I don't really mind snow. I don't purposely live in a place with a lot of snow anymore. But the trouble here is, of course, hills and lack of equipment to deal with it and inexperience of all of us. Gosh, does that make being in the house all the time a good thing because we don't bother to go out and drive? I don't know. Upsides, downsides. But it strikes me that more than ever before this time of year, I feel very much in the doldrums, that sense of windless waters, right? Where ships sometimes get stuck. And I'm feeling a little stuck myself. It's the weather, and it's knowing that people all over the country, friends and relatives, etc., are struggling because the weather is in so many places so severe. And of course, the larger questions that that raises for us about how the weather is changing. Um, it's almost 1 year exactly since, really, it is 1 year exactly since the beginning of COVID and the transformation that that's had for so many people, devastation in their personal lives, or just minor inconveniences that are piling up and piling up and piling up. No one has gotten out of this unscathed, I don't think. I think February is also kind of the post-holiday letdown. I just noticed the other day that my neighbors no longer put their outdoor lights on. We stopped turning ours on a while ago, and the neighbors held out a little bit longer, but theirs are off now. And there's that sense of, it's just kind of yuck. Um, and sometimes that raises that question, why? Why is it this way? And that's what we're going to talk about today is why, when you are in the midst of suffering or even just plain old discomfort or a sense of the doldrums of being stuck in windless waters, is the question that comes to mind for you, why? Why is it this way? Well, as I said in the introduction to the show online, why is not the best question to be asking. So we're going to talk about why that is. But first, let's breathe. Let's do a breathing exercise to increase calm, to increase focus and attention, and to just kind of settle our bodies and minds all at one time. So we're going to do that one where we bring our hands to the heart, to our heart center. On an inhale, interlace our fingers and push our palms forward. On an exhale, raise our hands above our head on an inhale, and then release our hands on an exhale. And we're going to do this 3 times. So inhale. Last time. And just breathe normally. Maybe roll your shoulders or wiggle your fingers and toes and just feel present in your body. And we're going to be coming back to that theme of embodied awareness throughout the show today. So, why questions? Why? Why? It's such a difficult question, but it's maybe an ingrained habit for you, as I think it is for me, and as I've seen in the lives of people around me. My mother was a great one for asking why questions, and she often asked it in that moment of, I think, self criticism, as well as just feeling as though the way she was raised and the ideas that were imparted to her about how her life ought to be as an adult, so few of them had come to pass. Or I think she often felt that some had come to pass and then been ripped away from her. And she often, at a very deep level, had that question of kind of, why me? Why is my life this way? Why has this happened to me? I think that was often paired with, and I see this in my life coaching practice, that first question of kind of why me? Why is my world this way? And it can lead to the other side of that, which is why am I like this? Why am I prone to an overactive imagination? Why am I prone to catastrophic thinking? Why am I prone to uh, being so empathetic towards others that I'm trapped in their feelings and I don't know how to get out of that loop that I'm in? I think as I've been thinking more and more over the last few years about mindfulness, it sometimes occurs to me that that why question, why is it this way and why am I this way and why is the world this way, is almost the opposite of something that's very important in mindfulness, which is acceptance. And acceptance, I always like to say, is not the same as agreement. So if I accept that I am this way and I accept that you are the way you are, that doesn't mean I agree with or don't ever expect or want change, but it means that I'm not constantly fighting the reality of who I am and who you are. So to always ask the why question, why is it this way, is a little bit like saying, why isn't it else an other way? Why isn't it different? Why aren't you different? Why am I not different? Right? So it says things shouldn't be the way that they are, they should be otherwise. And I think that's at the heart of the why question. So, like a lot of people, I went to graduate school, and you learn a lot about research in graduate school and how people do research. And one thing that's always stayed with me and is really something I think about in the context of the why question is learning early on from a professor in kind of a probably an introduction to graduate studies course, that researchers almost never ask why questions. In fact, it's a little bit hard to think about any form of research that really comes down to a why question. Well, why is that? They ask instead questions about what happens, how does it happen, when does it happen, where does it happen, under what circumstances or conditions, in what context, with what antecedents does this phenomenon of interest to me happen. Research, in other words, asks answerable questions, answerable in the sense that they are questions that rely on observation, on noticing what's happening, and in sometimes really stopping at that point of I really want to see what is happening before I can ever make draw any kinds of conclusions about why something happens, or even how things are connected, correlated, caused by one thing or another. First, I just really want to know what. Why questions are unanswerable, I think, because not in the research context so much as in our own lives, because they're squishy, right? If I ask myself every year a why question about my life, why is my life this way? It seems to me that every year my answer might change because my perception of why, as it applies to my own behavior or someone else's behavior, changes as my life changes, right? As I have more experiences, as I read something, as I watch something, anything that I take in that shifts my perspective or adds to my perspective is probably going to change how I would answer a why question. So, why questions are squishy and therefore not necessarily particularly productive to be asked. The challenge, I think, is that we may believe, if we're thinking about this in the context of our immediate lives and any kind of suffering we might be experiencing, that until we can answer the why question, why am I this way and why is the world this way, we can't move forward. That why questions are so ingrained that we cannot find a path forward until we can answer them. But the other thing about those why questions is that they tend to always be looking backward. And again, memory is fallible. It's hard. Knowledge is fallible. What we think about and how we make sense of, and our perspective, and all the things that change, are adding to this challenge of trying to really put our finger on the why of any particular situation in which we find ourselves. So we're going to take our first break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the idea that these why questions are ingrained in us, and some reading I've been doing lately on telomeres, and what researchers are telling us about how our habits of mind have an impact on our bodies, and the two things are, in relationship to each other. And I think that some of those negative results and consequences of our habits of mind are seen in our, maybe if we get stuck on wanting to find answers to why questions. So we're going to talk about that when we come back. You're listening to Nothing But Now on Transformation Talk Radio. I'll see you after the break. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Nothing But Now on Transformation Talk Radio. I'm Mariangela Maguire, and today we're talking about why questions and how it is that focusing on asking why might be part of what keeps us stuck in windless waters or the doldrums. At least I think it has been for me. And so I want to share that in the context of mindfulness practices. And particularly, I want to talk about the work that I've been reading lately from Elizabeth Blackburn. And Elizabeth Blackburn is a Nobel Prize winning scientist. She won the Nobel Prize for Medicine, and her work on the molecular nature of telomeres. She's the president of the Salk Institute. And she wrote an essay with Elizabeth Epple, who is the director of the Aging, Metabolism, and Emotions Center at the University of California, San Francisco. And she's a health psychologist. So doctors Blackburn and Epple write about telomeres, and this is the science part, and that's, so I'll be honest with you, it makes me nervous to describe it, but I do think it made sense when I read it in theirs, and so this is mostly quoting from them. So you may already know what telomeres are, so here goes a little recap. They live at the end of our chromosomes. They're like caps, and they keep the genetic material from unraveling, and so they shorten with each cell division, and they help to determine how fast cells age. When they get too short, the cell stops dividing. And when our cells stop dividing, then those aging cells are not replaced by healthier cells. So in other words, as our telomeres get shorter and the cells stop dividing, we age. And that actually starts when we're about 25 years old. And so it's certainly not entirely avoidable. And there are a lot of factors actually that influence the life of a cell. But short telomeres are a major factor in human cells growing old. That's the aging process, inevitable, but not simple, right? Blackburn and Epple want us to understand that telomeres shorten, but they can also lengthen. It isn't a one-way process. Aging can be slowed, or it can be accelerated, and in some places even reversed. So this means something else that I think is really important. The length of a telomere is not just determined by our genetic code. It's certainly influenced by it, but that's not the whole story. It's as Blackburn and Epple put it, the telomeres listen to us. So our activity levels, our stress, our diet, all have an impact on our telomeres, and that means we can make choices that improve healthy cell renewal and promote it, and we can make choices that undermine it. Now, I always think when you talk about aging, you should have a caveat about the fact that A, it's inevitable. B, there's nothing wrong with it. I always like to quote my mother, who used to say it beats the alternative. And people say, well, what's the alternative to aging? Death. So if staying alive is on a priority for you, and I don't say that lightly in this incredible year that we've had of people dying perhaps I would argue unnecessarily, and often alone. This aging of our cells really, I think, matters to all of us. And I don't think that it's about looking young. I don't think it's about being able to run a marathon when I'm 90. But I do think it's about instead being able to make some conscious choices about that process. And the idea that I can make some of those choices, right? And we often talk about it in terms of aging anyway. I walk every day because I think, well, maybe it keeps my hips loosened. And I watched my mother suffer badly from osteoporosis and limited mobility at the end of her life. And I would like to avoid that as long as possible. I, think about my diet, not as well as whatever. I'm not going to criticize myself, but I think about what I eat, and what I notice the older I get is that I'm less concerned about weight and a little bit more concerned with and noticing that things that I used to enjoy don't agree with me as much anymore. And I do think that's a function of aging. So I'm going to make different choices. And what Blackburn and Eppel talk about, and the part of their presentation I found most interesting, is that they want to understand the relationship between our thoughts and our thoughts and the health of our telomeres, particularly. And through their research and that being done by others, they talk about 4 particular kind of habits of mind, familiar topic on this show, that are damaging to our telomeres. And the first one that they mention is cynical hostility. It's when we go beyond observing what's happening and say, this is an unpleasant situation, stuck in traffic, let's say, to believing that that unpleasantness, right, the traffic, the long line, complicated bureaucracy, the weather, is somehow happening to us, is aimed at us, is aimed at, in fact, making us miserable. And for some reason, when I was reading this, I thought of people who often put on a smiley face, and I can sort of be this person sometimes, so maybe that's why I thought of it. But that smile sometimes masks cynical hostility, right? A tendency to say, why, right? That kind of clenched fist, why is this happening? In other words, why are things as they are right now? Why can't they be otherwise? And particularly of personalizing it, which is something that, Buddhist philosophy really encourages, is to be cautious about, if not try to avoid a bit, personalizing the things that happen in our world. So cynical hostility is found in this kind of scientific research to have a negative impact on our telomeres and our health in general. Another one is pessimism. And of course, people are cautious about wanting to just put a happy face on everything, and optimism or positivity for its own sake, and kind of a mindless positivity. I don't know that I want positivity to be my reflex either. I think acceptance is a different place than positivity, but pessimism as a reflex, pessimism as the first response every time. And I always think about a time when my partner and I were living in Indianapolis, and a relative came to visit and had slept in later than we had because it was from a different time zone. So my partner and I were downstairs drinking coffee when she came down in the morning, and I was just about to say good morning, and she said, "Wow, the trains are really loud here." I didn't. This is who she was, right? This was her first words to other people in the morning were not going to be "Good morning, how are you?" Which is what I was about to say, but instead that thing that had really bugged her, and it's kind of a mindset, right, of just seeing everything first through that lens of what's wrong. A third one that they mention is rumination. And we've talked in some ways about this on the show before, but they contrast it, I think, helpfully to reflection. So reflection is when we think back on an event and we to make sense of it, to enjoy it again, kind of thinking about it again, and maybe to do some problem solving if things didn't go as maybe you would have liked them to go. But when we're in the zone of rumination, when we're treading that same ground over and over again, when we're in the process of reminding ourselves of the worst aspects of our life, we're doing what Martha Beck calls story fondling, telling ourselves that sad story, that hurtful story, that painful story of what has happened in our life over and over again. And then the fourth one that they mention is suppressing thoughts and feelings, right? And it's interesting to me. I think we might ask ourselves, do we sometimes tell ourselves that the opposite or the antidote to rumination, to being stuck in a story, is to just, push those thoughts and feelings away? But of course, it's not, because pushing feelings away and thoughts away doesn't eliminate them, right? It just redirects them. So having a bad day in one part of our life, pushing those feelings away, and then, oh, surprise, surprise, snapping at somebody who has nothing to do with the thing we were upset about, right? Of feeling ill, perhaps upset stomach, tension, etc. And because we've pushed the stories and thoughts and feelings away, we may not even have a sense of where it's coming from. So in all four of these cases, whether it's cynical hostility, pessimism, rumination, suppressing thoughts and feelings, all of these are habits of mind that people like Blackburn and Epple have found have an actual impact on our physiology. They make our telomeres shorter. And shorter telomeres not only increase and accelerate the aging process, but they come with a host of other kinds of problems, physical and medical kinds of problems, because when cells stop dividing and get replaced by new cells, it's the aging process, but it's also our body in a variety of ways simply doesn't work as well as effectively. We become stiffer, less mobile, etc. Probably less flexible of mind as well. So thinking about these things, I'm kind of a visual person, I suppose, but I imagine through these behaviors of suppressing thoughts and feelings, the rumination, the pessimism, the cynical hostility, I can imagine these feelings and thoughts getting trapped in my body, really getting lodged in particular places in my body, particularly places where I notice I feel tension. And in doing that, they are shortening my telomeres. They are accelerating my aging. And aging is inevitable, as my mother also liked to say. I love to quote my mother. None of us is getting out of this alive. So, there is that inevitable end. But the question is, can I have an influence over that process? And can I do it not just through something like physical exercise or paying really close attention to what I eat and what makes me feel good when I eat and what makes me feel yucky when I eat, but also to habits of mind. And that one habit that I think often includes or takes up all of these is getting stuck in why questions, getting stuck in those questions about, why is it this way? Why is my life this way? Why am I this way? And believing that until I can answer the why question, I can't move forward. I can't make changes. I can't undo some of those habits of mind. I can only stay stuck in this situation. So we're going to talk about these why questions and how they're related to this telomere challenge when we come back from our break. So I'm Mariangela Maguire, and you're listening to Nothing But Now on Transformation Talk Radio. I'll see you after the break. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Nothing But Now on Transformation Talk Radio. So we are talking about the impact of getting stuck in and the ingrained habit of asking why questions. Why is my life this way? Why are you this way? Why is the world this way? Why am I this way? When we think about places in our life where we experience suffering and we get stuck in that, trying desperately to figure out why things are the way they are. And I was just talking about the research that people like Blackburn and Epple are doing on telomeres and the relationship between our habits of mind and our physical health, and it's particularly the aging process. And telomeres are those little caps at the end of our chromosomes, and they keep the genetic material from unraveling, and they are important for the process of cell development and renewal. And when they are too short and our cells can't continue to divide and aging cells get replaced by new cells, then we start to the aging process is in full swing. And although it's inevitable, the research suggests that we can make decisions just as we can around things like diet or physical activity to slow the process, and in some places even kind of reverse or make those telomeres longer. So where I'm interested in the why questions and how they are influencing this. And the researchers talk about all those habits of mind, pessimism, cynical hostility, suppressing thoughts and feelings, rumination, getting stuck in our stories, and how that really has an impact, a negative impact on the telomeres. So when I think about why me, why is the world this way, why can't I be happy? Why questions don't, if I think about them and the kinds of why questions I might ask in the context and in response to suffering, they don't reduce cynical hostility. I think they encourage it. Why me? They don't turn pessimistic thoughts into optimistic ones, because again, they tend to be focused on the negative, particularly, and that sense that bad things are happening, not just in my environment and in my life, but to me, and that sense of this is really personal. Why questions don't necessarily promote reflection in that sort of learning from its sense. Instead, I think they tend to promote rumination, stuck in the story, telling ourselves the same story over and over again with the attendant why questions. Why did this happen to me? And I don't think they allow us to address our thoughts and feelings. They might allow us to notice our thoughts and feelings, but I don't think that they allow us to address them, which is to say, to acknowledge them and to speak and as back to them. So, what's the alternative? Well, I think it can be questions. I think really focusing on observation, just like a lot of scientists do, right? Asking observational questions allows us to notice patterns and habits of mind. So, where does my mind go? When something happens in my environment that I'm unhappy with, where does my mind go? Noticing that habit is very helpful, because then that's how you start to notice something like the habit of pessimism. What is my mind doing? Not just what am I thinking about, but what is the activity of my mind? Is it a worrying activity? Is it fretting? Is it complaining? Is it criticizing myself or others? What is the typical activity in the presence of suffering that my mind starts to engage in? We can notice other things. When have I had these thoughts and feelings before? Typically, in the face of suffering, especially in that, not sort of the, when I burn my hand on the stove, which I did just recently and have two little spots to show for it, grabbed a pan. And that's, that kind of gesture that I'm making when I say that I grabbed a pan, and the suffering was not that immediate, with the burn, it's more the shock. And the pain came a few seconds later. But where did my mind go? To self-criticism. What a stupid thing to do. How can you be so careless, thoughtless, etc.? So when have I had these thoughts and feelings before? Right? When am I in the presence of that kind of self-criticism? Where do I notice it in other places in my life? How is it that this is a pattern that I've developed? And then who am I when my mind goes to those places? Who am I when my mind goes to those places? In that particular situation, I'm a kid. I'm a kid again who is careless and thoughtless and makes mistakes and gets in trouble and causes my mother to get upset about things, etc. So when we think about our suffering from a more observational perspective, instead of trying to answer the why is it this way question, but instead being willing to say simply, where does my mind go in the presence of suffering? What is my mind doing when I notice suffering? When have I had these thoughts and feelings before? What is familiar here? Who am I, right, in these moments of suffering? To observe rather than to ask why, it can allow for a real transformation in our understanding of our own lives. Jack Kornfield talks about sort of the three parts of mindfulness, and he talks about mindfulness of the body. And this is that idea that I often mention of noticing where things are happening in our bodies. People talk about kind of the mind-body connection, but I just, in some ways, even the idea that they're connected is a little bit silly to me. That they are an integrated whole makes more sense to me. That we often lose track of that. right? That we think of ourselves as all up in our heads and very disassociated from our physical feelings. That's true. But I think the idea that they're in any way disconnected other than in a way we create and is created and encouraged by the culture is kind of a different issue. So he suggests that really coming back to that idea of where are things happening in my body? How do I feel in my body in the presence of my own life, whether it's suffering or happiness, right? But to be that body awareness is so critically important. And as I like to say, the body is our early warning system. And before our mind goes in some unhelpful direction, our body has already felt the tension, the anxiety, the stress, the unhappiness. It's already there, and giving us a kind of signal to say, hey, pay attention. Suffering thoughts, maybe quick on the heels of this suffering physiology. He talks then about a second pillar kind of mindfulness, which is the heart connection of noticing our emotions. The rumination and this opposite, the suppressing of feelings. As I said, it doesn't take the emotions away. It doesn't clear the emotions from being lodged in our body. In fact, both rumination and suppression keep those negative feelings, keep the anxiety, despair, frustration lodged in our bodies and in our minds. And so to bring our awareness to them and to notice where they're happening and that they are happening, and to name them is a very different experience than to simply either ruminate over the negative story or push those feelings down. And the third then pillar he would suggest of mindfulness is being mindful of our thoughts. That question again, where does my mind go? What is the habit that I find myself in? The other day, we were getting some work done in our house, and so we had kind of a challenge of, was this going to all fall apart? And it was, I hate to even mention it. I say this, I realize kind of hesitantly because there's so much bigger problems that people have to deal with, but my problems are my problems. So I'm just going to suggest that, okay, so I just acknowledge that here I am. My life is complicated too sometimes, not very often, but once in a while. And I was really mad. I was mad at myself. I was mad at my partner. I was mad at a third party. I was mad at the situation and factors over which none of us had any control. And I didn't know what to do with it. So I sat in a chair. My partner wasn't home. And one of the things I wanted was to not just unload on her when she walked in the door. And I have to say that was one thing that was coming to mind is, how can I keep from just unloading? So I started talking to myself out loud. I just talked and said, this is how I feel. I'm angry. My chest is tight. I can feel my throat starting to constrict. And I know that feeling comes from, and maybe not in a wise sense, but I've noticed that feeling before when I feel silenced or I can't tell somebody how I feel. I literally feel a kind of constriction and tension in my throat. My throat feels like I have a sore throat at that point, not that scratchy kind, but that just achy kind. So I just kept talking out loud. And I'll be honest, I did not unload on my partner when she got home, but I wasn't in a particular, I wasn't sweetness and light either. Not really. I'd made a little progress, but not a lot. But I'd made some progress. At least I had been able to name what was happening for me, and I wasn't trapped in it. And that's really the key here, is being able to address what's happening for me before I even address it with anybody else, so that I'm not misdirecting those feelings. I'm not flying off the handle at somebody who's not really the cause of the challenge. And to notice, what is the story I was telling myself in my anger, in my frustration, was a sense of, I'm failing at this project. I'm not doing this right? I'm a big, like most people, I have a lot of self-criticism, and that's really what was happening. So to be able to know that, at least, got me to a slightly better place than I was at before. It wasn't perfect. Perfect's not an option. Perfect isn't a goal or an aspiration, but I wasn't just lost in my frustration and anger. So we're going to take a break, and we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about another concrete practice I want to encourage people to think about as they become students of their own mind, as they try to reach a place where they can address their thoughts and feelings and not feel simply at the mercy of their thoughts and feelings. So you're listening to Nothing But Now on Transformation Talk Radio, and I'll see you after the break. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Nothing But Now on Transformation Talk Radio. I'm Mariangela Maguire, and we are always here to talk about our mindfulness journey, or the mindfulness journey, however you might like to phrase that. And today in particular, we're talking about an ingrained habit many of us have, particularly in the face of suffering, which is to ask ourselves, why? Right? Why is this happening? Why are you the way you are and troublesome to me? Why am I the way I am and troublesome to you and to me? Why? We get stuck sometimes in those why questions. And here in the middle of the winter of sort of the doldrums, that space of windless water where we might be feeling particularly stuck, both this time of year and this particular year, those why questions may seem more urgent than ever. And what I notice in working with clients is that oftentimes they believe that their progress towards greater happiness, capacity and ability to address their emotions rather than simply being at the mercy of their emotions, that it all hinges on being able to come up with a definitive answer to the why question. But whether I think about my mother and the kind of suffering that she experienced in her life and the way that she was trapped by those why questions, or a client who's in her early 20s and also feels a little trapped by those why questions, it is a trap. I don't think that they are questions that move us forward. And I talked a little bit about some research that's done on telomeres, the parts of our chromosome that help cell division. And cell division is really important because new cells replace aging cells, and that's part of a kind of general health of our bodies. And certainly our genetics play a big part in that. Our activity level, our stress level, our food intake all play a part in and influence the health and the length of our telomeres, but so do our habits of mind. And it's always nice when research, scientific research, backs up a particular perspective that I find compelling. And so the habits of mind that are really been observed as shortening our telomeres are cynical hostility, pessimism, getting stuck in our stories, rumination, and suppressing thoughts and feelings. And not all of us do all four of those things, but all four of those things are habits of mind. They are places that our mind tends to go, activities our mind tends to engage in when we are in the presence of suffering, of discomfort, of unhappiness, stress, anxiety. So what I've been suggesting, that instead of asking the why question, to simply let that question go. Some would say most why questions are unanswerable because they tend to be squishy. Things change so much over time that we can't necessarily know a why answer for all time, whereas we can observe in a mindful way what's present in the moment. So when I am in the presence of that suffering, to be able to say, where has my mind gone? Where do I feel this in my body? When have I been in the presence of these feelings before? Who am I when I have these feelings and thoughts? And those questions are the questions of being able to address that process, to address what's happening in our minds. So, and I always talk about habits of mind, and I want to mention this thing that I haven't thought a whole lot about how this really relates to the why questions, but more about habits. And I just want to suggest this because I thought this was so helpful to me, and it's really stuck with me, this idea of friction in the process of trying to change or adopt a habit. So the idea is that if we want to develop a habit, we want to reduce the friction between ourself and that habit. And I guess really the example I would give in this case that relates to why questions is something like meditation is an opportunity to become a better student of our own mind, to observe where our mind goes, and to give our mind and sometimes a kind of break from the busyness of our life. But also even beyond that is really that notion of just noticing, even in the sitting meditation, where does my mind go? So if you want to develop meditation habit that can be very hard to do. And I always like to, take it down to the smallest elements, try to incorporate just a mindful attitude towards activities you're going to engage in anyway, like making the bed or brushing your teeth. But also then if you're trying to have a sitting meditation habit, what can you do to reduce the friction between yourself and that habit? So I used to meditate anytime I could sort of find in the course of my day. And I thought that was better than getting up really early in the morning to do it, because I don't think of myself as someone who likes to get up really early in the morning. But then I started this project of taking pictures at sunrise. Of course, I got earlier in the day, and I realized when I was getting up at 5:15 to take the picture of sunrise that I really didn't have a problem getting up that early. So I thought, okay, will this help me meditate? And it has. It turns out that finding time in the course of my day, there's a lot of friction there. I can't necessarily do it. I'm too distracted. I have too many other things going on. So I reduced the friction by getting up at what I would have thought a year ago was an ungodly time of day, in order to meditate. So what are some other things? I like to go walking in the morning, and I was noticing that I would get up and meditate, put on with, sweatpants and a sweater on, and then I changed my clothes to go walking. And it wasn't that I didn't do it, but that feeling like, oh, I don't know, too much effort, right? So I started putting on the walking clothes when I got up before I meditated. And it's not, so the behavior isn't different in the sense that I did the walk before, I do the walk now. What's gone is that, and that's worth it. It's not a lot of change, but it's worth it. It is one fewer moment in my day when I feel, I like it. I encourage it. So thinking about whatever the habit is, whether it's a habit of mind or a habit of body or the habit of mind body, that you're trying to develop, if you're trying to add one, adopt one, can you reduce the friction between yourself and that habit? And then of course there's the opposite. If you're trying to stop doing something, the strategy is to increase the friction between yourself and that habit. So I like chips, I know, whatever. I don't take the bag. I put them in a bowl and put the bag away so that there's more effort to get more chips. So what are some ways in which you can think about those ideas of friction as you try to develop different habits of mind and also different habits of body, making your life in some ways easier, and in other ways more difficult, right? So these doldrums that we're in right now, many of us, of course, they're going to pass because spring's going to come. The impeachment trial will end. The vaccine will be more widely available, on and on. Time will pass. We won't be here forever. But the reality is, of course, new challenges will emerge. So changing the questions that we ask ourselves about our life is a habit worth developing, because to be able to answer those questions, to really notice what's happening, can give us greater internal capacity to deal with our life. There's always going to be external problems. There are always going to be ingrained habits of mind, but we can make a change in the way that we operate in the world. And one way to do that is to really become aware of where our mind goes, how we feel in our body, when we've been in that place before, and who we are when we're in that place. This is all stuff that I talk with clients about all the time. And if you'd like to learn more about my coaching practice, you can contact me at Mariangela Maguire at gmail.com, or you can come to my website, maguirelifecoach.com, and you can use the form there to contact me. That first conversation is always free. And we want to talk about what your goals are. I'll describe my process. We'll have a short session. So visit me at maguirelifecoach.com or email me at mariangelamaguire.com. I hope you'll join me next Thursday at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern time. We're going to talk a little bit. We're going to process Valentine's Day. Okay, hope you have a great week. I look forward to talking to you next week on Nothing But Now on Transformation Talk Radio. Take care.